Muito obrigado, Sr. Presidente. Começo por responder diretamente ao Sr. Deputado Paulo Rangel, para lhe agradecer as suas palavras e para dizer que, realmente, os países que têm estado sob o programa têm feito um esforço notável, com imensos sacrifícios. Por isso mesmo é que aqui os reconheci publicamente e por isso mesmo é que também continuo a fazer um apelo a maior solidariedade no conjunto da União Europeia. Este valor, solidariedade, com a correspondente responsabilidade, é essencial numa União verdadeiramente digna desse nome. J'aimerais aussi répondre à quelques questions qui ont été posées par d'autres parlementaires. Joseph Daul a parlé d'un principe auquel je tiens absolument, et la Commission, nous tenons absolument. C'est le principe de l'égalité des États devant les traités. En fait, nous sommes là devant un grand défi. Comment garantir, dans une Union à 28 États membres, certains qui sont dans la zone euro, certains qui ne le sont pas encore, certains qui ne veulent pas y être, comment garantir la flexibilité nécessaire sans créer de la stratification, sans créer des hiérarchies, sentant tous que nous faisons partie de la même Union. La Commission, comme gardien des traités, a l'obligation de défendre l'unité de notre projet et nous continuerons à le faire. Et donc, il s'agit d'une grande entreprise politique qui va demander beaucoup d'intelligence, beaucoup de sagesse, celle de garantir l'unité en même temps qu'on permet une diversité. Parce que là, je suis d'accord avec M. Verhofstadt, même si parfois j'ai l'impression que même quand nous sommes d'accord, M. Verhofstadt aime dire qu'il n'est pas d'accord avec moi, que nous devons avoir une plus grande intégration dans la zone euro. C'est pourquoi nous avons présenté le blueprint pour une véritable union économique et monétaire. Et à la fin, ce que vous avez proposé, M. Verhofstadt, sont les pas que nous avons proposés aussi dans ce blueprint. Un blueprint dont je suis particulièrement fier. L'autre jour, un des plus grands philosophes européens, M. Jürgen Habermas, a dit que jusqu'à présent, c'était la présentation la plus complète politique sur l'avenir de l'Europe, ce document que la Commission a présenté. Et nous continuerons à le développer de façon progressive, mais bien sûr avec cette vision, la vision qui nous emmène non seulement en termes de l'union bancaire, et j'étais ravi de voir qu'aujourd'hui pratiquement tous les groupes considèrent cela la priorité en termes de construction, les propositions qui sont sur la table, notamment le mécanisme de résolution unique, que j'ai vu que malgré des différences, vous pensez que c'est la priorité en termes de législation, mais aussi ce qui vient après l'union bancaire, en termes budgétaires et en termes aussi de gestion de la zone euro, même en termes d'union politique. And I think the point during this debate, for me, more interesting was this one. Many of you focus on the problems. Others focus on the solutions. I prefer to be on the side of the solutions. This is the question. I think my assessment was realistic. I have recognized that there are still difficulties. I have not said that we are out of the crisis. I've explicitly said that we are yet in the crisis and that we should avoid any kind of complacency. But regarding the situation, we have two possibilities. We have the possibility to insist on the negative side, to continue this self-depreciation and this Euro-pessimism that is so destructive, that sometimes is intellectually glamorous, but that will not bring hope and confidence to our citizens. Or we can, as European leaders, and you are, as I am, a European leader, we can give people hope. And we can say to them, look, there are indeed some signals, because there are some signals that things are changing for the better. And this is the point. And this is the political question I put to all of you at the beginning of my intervention today. And then I want to address myself more directly to the pro-European forces, those that share, as Mr. Svoboda said rightly, some from the centre-left, some from the centre-right, some from the centre, but basically we share the same values. What is going to be your story to the electors? Are you going to say, like the populists or the extremists, that everything is wrong in Europe? I think that if you go that way, you will only reinforce those who do not believe, as we believe, in European values. Mr. Callanan, you said, making a joke about possible competitors for the Commission election, that you are not interested in that job, that you are very happy with yours. Let me tell you very frankly that I think even if you were interested, you could not have a chance to be elected for President of the Commission. And you know why? I'm not saying that happily, because I think increasingly your party and your group is looking like the UKIP and the Eurosceptic anti-European group. And I start to have some doubts that you are going to be elected yourself in Britain if it's not UKIP that is going to be the first force in the British elections. Because when it comes to be against Europe, the people prefer, between the original and the copy, they prefer the original. That's probably why they are going to vote more for Mr. Farage than for Mr. Callanan. And this I don't say with any kind of satisfaction, because we have, even if we have some differences, we have worked in many areas very constructively with Conservatives, the British Conservatives and the Conservative group. We have worked together for the internal market, for reform. We have worked together against some kind of regulation. We have worked together in many areas, including free trade. But this is an important point, I think, because if those forces that are pro-European, or even those that are not really pro-European but constructive, have the same speech, the same political attitude of the anti-Europeans, the Eurosceptics, the populists, in that case, they will win next election. So my appeal to you is to make the case for Europe, because you are part of Europe. As I've said, many of the legislation that was done, it will not be possible without the very strong cooperation between the Commission and the European Parliament. The MFF, we were not happy with the result, but frankly, without the complicity between the Commission and the European Parliament, the result would be much, much lower. President Schulz knows that well, because we were together during those negotiations. And I could give you many more examples. Mrs. Arms, when you say that Europe has done nothing, or that in climate change there is zero, come on, let's be real. Europe is leading in the world in terms of the objective for climate change. About CO2 cars, the proposals were put forward by the Commission. If you are not satisfied with the solution now, ask the question to the Member States, not to the Commission. We are keeping a very strong commitment to climate change. Mr. Farage shows that populists are sometimes obscurantists. 99% of the science, Mr. Farage, believes that this climate change exists as a result of human activity. 99% of scientists. Of course, there are always people that are paid to say the opposite. But to pretend, as you pretend, that against all science, well-established science, that the problem of climate change is just an invention of the Greens or of the left, it's completely nonsense. Of course we have to find a way. Of course we have to find a sensible way to fight climate change. We have to look at the same time for competitiveness in Europe. We have to make this part of our agenda for growth, and I believe that the green economy brings many possibilities. It will be a mistake just to put the case on climate change on environmental matters. That's of course decisive. It's an existential thing for our planet, the conservation of our planet. But we have to make the case also in terms of the economy, in terms of what it can bring, in terms of our health. Because in fact we have seen increasingly natural disasters that most scientists attribute to climate change. So this is important, and I think that it's almost incredible that the leader of one European Parliament group says like that it is an invention of some political forces, something that has been established clearly by science. And as I've said before, I believe in science, and I believe part of the solution for our problems is for more science, through more science, more innovation, more research, more technology, and this is the way for Europe to address these problems. Regarding the social aspect, Mr. Svoboda, you know very well that Europe has been fighting a lot for this matter, at least European institutions. You know very well that the European Commission was pushing hard for a more generous social fund, for the Globalisation Adjustment Fund, for the financial transaction tax that now some member states do not want to implement. You know very well, so let's not create here artificial divisions. Now, what happens, in fact, is that we are aware of the difficulties in Europe. You are right, you and some others, when you highlight the difficulties that many of our citizens, namely unemployed people, are still living. And to one of the distinguished members of the Parliament that said to me that I have never seen that reality, that I have never seen people as beggars here near the Parliament, let me tell you, not only I've seen people near the Parliament, but together with Joseph Daul, I went to a banque alimentaire, a food bank, in the region of Strasbourg-Bas-Rhin. And I know well how many people are poor in Europe and suffer. Coming from my country, Portugal, I know well the difficulties of poverty in many of our sectors. But not only I know, I'm fighting to solve that problem. It was the Commission who kept the ambition for a fund for the most deprived people. And we had to fight a lot against some capitals that were pretending to put it out of our priorities. So not only we know the reality in Europe, but we are trying to do our best with the instruments we have to remedy those situations. And this is the point I want to make as well. Because as was said by some of you, where are the instruments? Many of these instruments and responsibilities are at national level. Let's be honest. Employment is mainly a national policy. We can influence, we can create some funds, we can create the Youth Employment Initiative. We took the initiative of the Youth Guarantee. But at the end, it depends on what member states do or do not do. This is the point. And that's why we have to be clear about this, because if not, and you are going to see that during the elections, many of our citizens are going to put the blame on Europe for what was indeed action or inaction of some of our governments and member states. That's the tendency to Europeanize the failure and to nationalize success. And I believe that you, as members of the Parliament, and we, as European Commission, we have a duty to explain to our citizens what is the national responsibility, what is European responsibility. Of course, having an honest and reasonable assessment. Of course, recognizing also that not everything we have been doing is perfect. Of course, recognizing that sometimes it's frustrating, the slow decisions of the member states and the European Union architecture, but giving hope to our citizens. I think that as political leaders, we have the duty of confidence. We have a duty to provide hope to our citizens. And that is my appeal to you, namely to the pro-European forces, that I believe that in spite of some ideological differences, share the same values that are in the Treaty of Lisbon, that have been there since the Treaty of Rome, the values of the dignity of human being, of peace, of freedom and justice. And that is why I was also happy to receive the words of many of you congratulating the Commission by what we are doing in terms of rule of law. Because if we want to speak about rule of law internationally, we have to be sure that here in Europe we also respect all those principles. Because our conception of Europe is not just about economy or about the market, is a conception based on values. And I believe that in spite of the natural differences, we basically share these values. And I have a great confidence in Europe. I think that was Mrs. McGuinness gave some figures about the extraordinary support that still exists in Europe to the European ideal. Don't you find really extraordinary that in spite of all the difficulties that the Greek citizens have been knowing, a huge majority of Greek citizens supports the euro? Don't you find extraordinary that in Spain, even if there are 5 million non-Spanish unemployed, there is not a party xenophobic or anti-foreigners? I believe that in Europe we have a great resilience. I believe that this crisis has tested us and is testing us to the limit. And I believe that in Europe, if you keep the objectives, we will get out of this crisis stronger because our resilience was tested. It's a completely caricature to present European policy just fiscal consolidation. at least since 2010, that I have been saying that fiscal consolidation alone is not sufficient, that there are some limits to the policy of fiscal consolidation. Our policy is a complex mix of fiscal consolidation, structural reform and investment, targeted investment in the sectors of the future, to have a more innovative, a more modern Europe. And even in fiscal consolidation, we have been adapting to the difficult economic cycle. The Commission has been putting much more emphasis on the structural deficit than on the nominal deficit, as you know. And it was our proposal in several cases to give the Member States more time to adjust their deficits. So trying to find the right balance and the right calibration for a policy that, of course, has, in the medium term, in the short term, has naturally a recessionary effect. But the question, once again, to say, the question is, who is responsible for the difficulties in Europe? Is this policy, or was the mistakes made in the past? One of you said Greece is the victim of the policies of Europe. False, completely. Greece is the victim of the responsible behavior of the governments of Greece. This is the reality. And it was because of that that the European Union was asked to come and support. Without European Union support, Greece will be now completely insolvent. The situation will be much more difficult. So we have to have the courage to say who created the problem. Without European Union, the countries that are now in a difficult situation will be in a much worse situation. Without the euro, they will be suffering much more. And so this is important to put the record straight, because if not, our electors, your electors, will think that Europe is to blame, when in fact, as I said, Europe, even if it's not perfect, Europe has not created the problem. Europe is a victim of the problem, and Europe is certainly part of the solution. I thank you for your attention.